Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War news update, sort of second part thereof for the 12th of May 2024 because I added an addendum to my first video. We're going to talk about military equipment and aid to Ukraine as well as geopolitics. I think there's just the right amount to put these subjects all in one video. We're going to start with the UK, and this is something that's been going around Tinternet for a couple of days, but as ever, when we hear of aid packages going to Ukraine, there's often a confusion between pledged and delivered. And quite often things then get double counted, or at least in people's perceptions. This is why German aid from Ukraine is very good at saying, right, this has been pledged, this has been delivered. Because you get the idea that the delivery announcements make people believe that country is given a second time because they pledged it over here and then they're announcing deliveries and that's the same package. Okay, so the UK here is delivering its largest ever military aid package to Ukraine, but this is almost certainly the one that was announced recently as an extra £500 million package. And the equipment they're providing is 4 million rounds of ammunition, more than 1,600 missiles, and I presume that's going to be things like the Martlet missiles, Starstreak, sort of man-pads, man-portable air defense system, maybe Brimstone missiles, ASRAMs for the Super Cat, so surface-to-air missiles, different types, not things like Patriot missiles. We don't have them. I guess the smaller air defense missiles, but a lot of them, like 1,600 is a good amount. 400 vehicles, and we talked about that last time when they announced this. Different types of vehicles. Likely there's going to be some tracked vehicles thrown in there, but certainly 160 Husky vehicles, these mine-resistant ambush protection sort of vehicles or tactical support vehicles that has greater protection there. Euromaidan Press reports this, saying pretty much the same stuff. Comprehensive aid package, 160 Husky protected mobility vehicles. Substantial support underscores UK's commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, etc., etc. So this is all good news, but I guess this is it's going there now. It was talked about, and now it's on the way. Is delivering. Those 400 vehicles are going to be super useful. If you add that together with what the US is throwing Ukraine's way, I mean, we know there's going to be 100 Bradleys, over 100 M113 APCs. Possibly, I keep seeing different things about Humvees and then MRAPs. So I talked about, they announced some MRAPs. The US aid package was announced the other day, $400 million, and they were talking about MRAPs, and I said that could be the Humvees, but I know perfectly well that Humvees are not mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles. In fact, MRAPs were developed because Humvees didn't do a good enough job in, I believe, Iraq in protecting troops from IEDs and whatnot. So yeah, Humvees are definitely not MRAPs, but I couldn't quite work out what was going on because I've seen these different claims, but I think they are just getting MRAPs and Humvees, and I've even seen maybe 1,000 Humvees, but I don't know. There's an awful lot of Humvees in the US, something like 230,000 Humvees. I mean, the US has an awful lot of these vehicles, and they are sort of being phased out as well, so there should be a great scope for the US to provide a whole range of those sorts of vehicles to Ukraine. But anyway, the UK, when you put these together, then actually that's hopefully a really decent amount, and all the other countries that are giving stuff, really decent amount of the kind of workhorse vehicles that Ukraine will be using. Now, Clive Dunning, thanks Clive, really appreciate this, just shot a comment on a thread saying, hello Jonathan, 2 wee bits of British military news that seem to have slipped under general media streams this past week. One, James Cartledge, the Minister of State for the MOD, announced that 114 CVRT armoured vehicles, which include 97 scimitars, are being disposed of. I wonder where they will end up. And 2, the British Army fired the last round from Britain's fleet of AS-90 self-propelled guns in the UK. A battery of AS-90s in Estonia will remain there for at least another 9 months, possibly for training. Thought you might like to know. This is great, so thanks for that, mate. And I did a little bit of research, so UK DJ here reporting. So Clive Lewis, the Labour MP for Norwich South, requested information on the status of FV-107 scimitar armoured vehicles this week. The question sought clarity on how many of these vehicles were still in use and how many were awaiting disposal. James Cartledge, Minister of State for the Ministry of Defence, responded on the 10th, providing specific details regarding the operational status of these vehicles. The British Army, quote, the British Army's fleet of combat vehicle reconnaissance, that's what CVR stands for, tracked combat vehicle reconnaissance vehicles, totals 114 as of May 2024, 97 of which are FV-107 scimitar platforms, he explained. He further noted that as the Army's entire CVRT active fleet has been withdrawn from service, all 114 are currently in the disposal process. So we could, whether that is all entailed in the 400 vehicles being sent as part of this package, I don't know. There was talk about possible FV vehicles being in that package previously. So I would have thought that'll all be part of that rather than going to Ukraine in subsequent packages, but who knows. The FV-107 scimitar is part of that CVRT series, was retired from active service in 2023 and is being replaced by the newer Ajax vehicles. Ajax is a replacement vehicle that has undergone quite a lot of delays and controversies, as you would expect with these kind of procurement and certainly procurement of new kit and replacement kit. I don't think it's been entirely successful. This response confirms that none of the FV-107 vehicles remain in active service, signaling the end of their operational life cycle within the British Army. Interesting, looking at the comments below here, actually, these are all defence nuts here, casting their opinion. Everyone is pretty much saying, get every single one of these and all the spares out to Ukraine. There's no need to have them in the UK if they're being replaced by the Ajax, and so on and so forth. But lots of talk about the individual qualities of each of these sort of variants against things like Bradleys or whatever else. I mean, they're not exactly the same type of vehicle, but you get the point. There's lots of interesting conversation there. So if you want to get a bit geeky on some of these things, it's worth finding out what like proper geeks with regard to this stuff think. And with regard to the AS90, the self-propelled howitzer, self-propelled gun that we are phasing out, and we now know that we're going to replace it with the Boxer, the RCH 155 remote controlled howitzer 155mm, that's going to be co-produced between UK and Germany. It's kind of a German thing. This is Britsky saying we have 39 AS90s remaining. So we've ended up giving more. Originally we gave 33, then another 17 have gone AS90s to Ukraine. They do like them. These are decent enough pieces of kit. They're not like Archers or whatever. These are from the 1990s, but they are just, I guess, fairly standard, easy to use, reliable bits of kit that have been sent over and welcomed by the Ukrainians. Now, we have 39 remaining and more are pledged to Ukraine, says Britsky. 50 was sent. But the 50 that were sent were the operational ones and spares. So I think we can imagine the state of the remaining ones. And there was some talk at the beginning about the operational status of some of those that were being sent. And the implication was that ones that were left weren't going to be particularly in working order. So, it'd be interesting to know how many of the remaining will be useful. But I guess they're all useful for spares and cannibalization and whatnot. But the 14 Archers that are replacing them obviously won't cover what those AS90s are able to do. If you're replacing 89 effectively AS90s with 14 Archers, then there's a bit of a gap there, and a possible extra 10 that we have on order, I believe, won't be there for 1 or 2 years. So what's going on? As someone else says, AS90s fired the last ever shells in the UK as Chestnut Troop, 1st Royal Horse Artillery, completed training ahead of Estonia. There are some 9 months left, then AS90s will bow out and go to Ukraine for good. So this is the idea that they're all going to go there. There is no way Boxer RCH 155 arrives in that time frame. So what's the plan? In other words, the Archers don't cover it, and the Boxers aren't going to be along for some time. So who knows what's going to go on? But I presume we're not planning on going to war. But then you don't plan these things. They come to you quite often, and you need to be prepared. So we could be a little bit short in the UK there. French aid to Ukraine, says Jean-Louis Thiriot, Vice President of the Defence Committee. estimates that the 3 billion euros in credits already released by France will probably have to be revised upwards. So I'm not sure exactly what package that, what agreement that is. It's not to do with the frozen asset stuff. It's a similar number, but it's not. Quote, all the help we give today will cost us less than a possible Russian breakthrough on the Dnipro. Defending Ukraine is a well understood national interest. 3 billion euros in aid is not bad. But it will not be enough if the United States stops supporting Kyiv. And of course, that depends on November elections, etc., etc. So that's the right kind of rhetoric there, from France, which is, we've got $3 billion in euros in credits. I presume that means that you can spend $3 billion inside France. Is that how that works? I don't know. Someone will let me know, I'm sure. And that's the kind of way France would do things anyway. But it's like, and that's not enough. So that's the right rhetoric. We like that, but that needs to be followed with tangible changes and offers and things. Latvia is to provide Ukraine with domestically produced drones and radar systems. They have been one of Ukraine's staunchest supporters since the outbreak of the full-scale war, and annually allocate 0.25% of GDP to provide military aid to Ukraine. That's insane. That's not 0.25% of increased spending on their own armed forces as a kind of percentage of GDP to qualify for NATO. That is literally 0.25% of our GDP goes to Ukraine to providing military assistance. And of course, there's some stimulus in there. So Latvia providing domestically produced drones and radar systems. So some of that spending, or a lot of that spending, or maybe all of that spending is inside Latvia. Latvian Prime Minister said earlier in April that Riga's military aid for Ukraine amounted to 392 million euros, $490 million, since February 2022. And of course, the size of that country, is a huge bit of spending by Latvia. Puts them way at the top of the list of spending as a percentage of GDP. Okay, the Netherlands is making measures to ensure the rapid delivery of additional air defense equipment and artillery shells to Ukraine, says Mark Rutte, who's still, I believe, the leader in the Netherlands, as they haven't quite sorted out, after so long, a coalition government. It's a bit of an issue there because not everyone likes the party that got the most votes, the PVV and Geert Wilders. They are also, Geert Wilders and PVV is somewhat more amenable to Russia and the Kremlin. So anyway, that's good news because that's exactly what Ukraine needs: air defenses and artillery ammunition. Right. Ukraine will receive a batch of RBS-70 NG with laser guidance systems from Australia. These are sort of not quite man pads. I don't know that whole system is man portable unless you are behemoth. I mean, I could carry that no problem, but I am built like a brick shithouse. But anyone else would struggle hugely. Me and my weenie arms and my chicken legs. Right, so that's good news from Australia. Thanks, mate. Really appreciate that. Don't make me speak Australian again. Look, I know you guys really, really appreciate my Australian, but it's just not going to cut the mustard. Right, okay. Ukrainians with a residence permit. So this is talking about, I wonder if Berthold in the threads, in the comments, will be having something to say about this. Almost certainly. I'll bet my mortgage on it. Ukrainians with a residence permit and a job will be able to stay in Germany, even despite the desire of the Ukrainian state to return citizens living abroad to participate in the war against Russia, according to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Quote, the legal situation is such that residence here is not questioned. Employment also leads to security of residence, he said. The Chancellor also called on Ukrainians in Germany to find employment. So I don't know whether this is all going to come down to whether they have residence permits or not, but I don't even think that the German government is prepared to root through society and find out those who don't have residence permits and send them back to Ukraine. I think Germany appears to be a fairly safe place for those who do not want to fight in the war, even if they do support Ukraine in the war. Ukrainians, that is. North Korea, so going on to Russian sort of topics here. North Korea may supply Russia with multiple rocket launchers. This is on the back of them already supplying Russia with ballistic missiles and huge numbers of artillery ammunition. They have given, 11,000 containers have been shipped at least from North Korea to Russia, and you would assume most of those will have artillery ammunition and whatnot in. They have, I don't know how many missiles they have given to Russia, but apparently of those ballistic missiles, 50% of them have failed. Or not being accurate or whatnot. Remember, I also showed you sometime back the artillery shells that had come from North Korea. Some of them had all their bits and pieces inside just really poorly. They're really poorly manufactured, basically, and this means you'd have an awful lot of trouble getting accuracy, possibly even issues firing them out of barrels and exploding barrels and whatnot. So North Korean ammunition isn't top dollar stuff. But, if they can fire it vaguely safely, even if, only 70% of them work or whatever the percentage is, when you're getting these at knockdown prices, no doubt, then, and you're desperate for anything and everything, then it's still going to be useful for the Russians. North Korea has developed a new 240mm multiple launch rocket system with, quote, guided projectiles that could be transferred to Russia as early as this year, according to South Korea's Yonhap news agency. So South Korea onto this. It's interesting though, South Korea are still not, they're worried about what North Korea is doing, but they're not matching them. They are still saying, yeah, we're not happy to provide stuff for Ukraine in the same kind of way. I'm a little bit disappointed with South Korea in some ways. I know that they did do a lot of backfilling earlier on in the war, but some of their rhetoric recently hasn't exactly been matching what they're worried about North Korea doing. So yeah, that's a little bit frustrating. Right, moving on to geopolitical topics here, and don't have too much to say. I think this whole weekend's been taken up with Eurovision or something like that. Anyway, German lawmakers suggest that allies could protect the sky over Western Ukraine. I think this is really interesting, although it's coming from opposition parties, so rather like the Taurus. They may sound off about Taurus needing to be sent, but it doesn't mean that it's going to happen. So Kyiv Independent here reports that German lawmakers suggest allies could protect sky over Western Ukraine from NATO soil. This is something we've talked about before. The Polish have been considering this. I think this is an absolute must. It should happen. Some German lawmakers from both the ruling and opposition parties have supported the idea of allies defending the airspace over Ukraine from NATO territory. Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung reported on May the 11th, which is yesterday. FAZ wrote that some experts like Nico Lange from the Munich Security Conference or Lieutenant General Heinrich Braus, a former NATO Deputy Secretary General, had suggested shooting down Russian missiles over Ukraine's border regions from Poland and Romania. I just had doing GCSE German at the age of 16 and just Lange Schlange being the hilarious German that I remember. Brilliant. Well done, me. Great education there. Polish officials have also mentioned the possibility, but no concrete decisions have been presented. Quote, defending the airspace over Ukraine from Poland and Romania should not be ruled out in the long term. And Anton Hofreiter from the co-ruling Green Party said, the lawmaker nevertheless added that matter is currently not under discussion as allies focus on supplying additional defence aid to Ukraine. Berlin has proven itself a leader in air defence support for Ukraine, launching an allied initiative aimed at securing additional air defence systems and pledging its third Patriot to Kyiv. Agnieszka Brugger, Hofreiter's colleague from the Green Party, also said it would be correct to, quote, station air defence systems at the borders of the neighbouring countries so that western parts of Ukraine can also be protected. Roderick Kiesewetter, so he's opposition CDU member, a Christian Democratic Union, that's Angela Merkel's party. He has been very big on making proclamations about what Germany should be doing to help Ukraine. I think that, it comes from a position of politicking as well as, being a strong supporter of Ukraine. But he says that the Western countries could shoot down Russian unmanned aerial vehicles launched at Ukraine. Quote, this would relieve the burden on the Ukrainian air defense and allow it to protect the front, Kiev said, comparing it to when the US and other Western countries protected Israel's airspace without becoming a party to the conflict. I completely agree with this. And Marcus Faber from the ruling coalition's Free Democratic Party also concurred that, in principle, the, quote, airspace over the Ukrainian border regions could be, quote, protected by air defences on NATO territory. So there's some cross-party support for this idea, but we'll wait to see whether it actually gains any traction in German politics more generally. Now, the US believes that Ukraine is not ready for negotiations with Russia. I like this rhetoric. I don't think we should be forcing Ukraine to the negotiating table. I think it's up to them, and we should support them in the war efforts in as big a way as we possibly can. Former US Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Victoria Nuland stated that Ukraine is not in a strong enough position to start negotiations with Russia to end the war, especially since the Kharkiv offensive from the Russians does look to be gathering a little bit of momentum. Syrskyi has said today that things are aggravated there, and it's looking a bit more challenging. But we'll look at that in the Frontline update if and when I get a chance to do that today. So going to Georgia, the footage coming out of Georgia is absolutely staggering in a good way. So I was talking about whether Georgia will react positively to the Georgia Dream administration's the government's use of the stick rather than the carrot in trying to deal with dissent and protests. So there was increasing violence from the police and these thugs that are employed to do the dirty work. Lots of people getting beaten up, including opposition parliamentarians. Well, Katie Shosheshvili says, I don't think I've ever seen so many people on the streets of Georgia before. This comes after Georgia Dream's mass Russia-style terror against its own people, threats and intimidation via phone calls, arbitrary detention, severe physical assaults, and targeted smear campaigns. So there's lots of shouting and chanting on the streets. Loads of people. Just look at these protests moving slowly through Georgia. It's phenomenal. And you know what? There's lots of footage. Here's some more incredible pictures coming from Tbilisi. This is Europe Square. We'll just increase the size of that. So those are crowds amassing there, and then we go on to this is the heart of the Georgian people speaking, says Tendar. They reject Putin, Russia's darkness, and instead embrace freedom, independence, and liberty. Tbilisi is alive, and they can clearly say no to Russian law. It's just incredible. So the question here is, what do Georgia Dream do now? Do they carry on cracking down, or do they try and make some kind of compromise? Do they call early elections? If they are erring towards the Russian sphere of influence, and if Russia are trying to influence very directly in terms of you should do this, by the way, then it's unlikely they're going to be going down any route that is democratic, that is giving the power to the people, because the momentum is clearly against Georgia Dream, and I'm sure they'll be hammered at the polls. So they could try and force an election and rig the election. I'm just speculating, spitballing here, but or they could keep going down the aggressive route. Is that wise? I mean, is that if you're going to start locking that many people up and beating that many people up, are you going to make it worse? Are you going to hit your economy? Is half your people, possibly an awful lot of young middle class intellectuals, or I don't know the demographic makeup here, but you might be like really affecting certain parts of the economy over others, or it could just be general here, and you could have people from the working class up to across to other aspects of society. I'd have to speak to some Georgians to know what the makeup is of the opposition to Georgia Dream. I know that Georgia Dream shipped in a load of people from rural areas, older people, and as mentioned, sort of rural workers and whatnot, to give pro Georgia Dream rallies, but those people actually were shipped in apparently without really knowing what they're being shipped in for, with pride with wine at the end, and then had lots of pictures taken of them sort of rallying, but they weren't actually really pro Georgia Dream. So quite often you see like urban centres being very kind of much more liberal, pro, in this case pro democracy, pro EU, in the same way you see that in St. Petersburg and Moscow, but you start going out into rural areas and you get a very different state of affairs, very different demographics, and Russia, Putin is supported much more out in outside of those liberal centres. Well, if this is going on in Tbilisi, is it the same thing, that actually Georgia Dream can command lots more support from outside of Tbilisi and the major urban centres? It's not a huge country, remember, it doesn't have a huge population, but I'd be interested to see any kind of analysis on that. A scene from the ongoing anti-Russian protests in Tbilisi, real culture versus Russian savagery. Again, when you're looking at these crowds, what sort of people are they? Who do they represent? Etc. etc. Yeah, I'd just be really interested. But it's certainly a growing protest against Georgia Dream. The Georgians clearly wanting to move towards the European sphere of influence. There's so many EU flags there, as well as, you know, having their own, sense of national identity represented by Georgia Dream. Represented by their politicians, rather than what Georgia Dream are trying to do, which is to send them back in time towards a Russian influence and identity. Now, of course, we should end with the Eurovision, where it was really interesting. So I watched this, and it was very clear. At one point, Ukraine were in the lead. You got to know how the voting works. So after all the juries from all 37 nations cast their jury votes, Ukraine was sort of somewhere down the list. And then when the national telephone voting came in from each of the countries all in one, Ukraine were massively boosted up, which tells you that Ukraine has generally a large support across Europe, and that's really good, and a very strong support. People feel strongly about Ukraine. Actually, had a really good song as well. It was a really good song. Now, interesting that Israel also got a massive vote too, which shows that's a very I know that, say, Thomas Tyner, for example, one of my sources I refer to quite often, he's really, really pro-Israel. And he said he had voted 35 times for Israel last night. So I think what you've got is Israel's one of those things where it's so divisive. You're either really far this way or really far that way. I'm kind of in the middle and saying, well, now I think Israel have gone too far, but I'm anti-Hamas. People that called me pro-Hamas yesterday in the threads, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm vehemently anti-Hamas. I am an anti-theocratic person. I'm a philosopher of religion. I'm an atheist. And so looking at an Islamic theocracy as the Hamas charter is like not who I am at all. However, I'm pro-people. So I'm pro-civilian. Right, and the Palestinians who have been killed as a result of trying to get Hamas by the Israelis or by Netanyahu's government and the IDF, I think is not acceptable. So on the one hand, I'm anti-Hamas, but on the other hand, I'm anti-civilian killing, and so I've got quite a nuanced approach that puts me a little bit in the middle. But people really go one way or the other, and it's really interesting. From just looking at Eurovision, tells you a story. Everything tells us stories, and I'm always talking about this. But those statistics tell us a story about Ukraine and Israel. I thought it was fascinating. Anyway, Ukraine ended up coming third, and that was really, really good, because I think that the song from Switzerland and performance from Switzerland was outstanding. I thought it was really very good, and Croatia was excellent as well. So in fact, this was a really strong Eurovision. Funny enough, Georgia I thought was brilliant and should have come much further up the list. I thought that was a shame they came further down the list, but they were really good. So Some excellent performances. Yes, it's completely camp and all of that, and you know it might not be your kettle of fish, but I think it's all just very positive thing. Now, what was really moving about the Ukrainian performance is, well, let's see if I can find it on a much bigger video, and I'll show you what I mean here. I'm going to be hit with a copyright infringement if I play this, but as you can see, one of the singers, it was her and this rapper going up, like there's definite elements of evoking the incendiary munitions coming down, and there's a moment where she's singing with them in the background as well. Yeah, here, and you're like, it's just the staging of this was absolutely fantastic. Really impressive performance from them both. Is great song as I mentioned, but then you know this is all it has to be, as someone points out here. Anton Garashenko says every Ukrainian realized those were not fireworks. By the way, it was officially announced that the singer from the Netherlands, whatever. So the point here is that these are incendiary munitions. These are incendiary munitions, is what they are referring to and referencing and whatever, symbolizing. And I just think it is powerful. It was a great song, and really pleased that Ukraine did as well as they did. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you. Later I'll be doing a live with Mark and Olena in about 3 hours' time. At time of recording, and then be appearing on Tochny live later tonight. Take care, speak soon.